What's up, YouTube? I got Adrian joining me today where we want to discuss the top Patek Philippe models to buy right now in the current market. So let's get right into it. Adrian, thanks so much for joining me. I figured who better than to go over the current Patek Philippe market and what to kind of buy or look out for and what are the deals right now than our head buyer here at Luxury Bazaar.
So again, I think today is a great environment to pick up stuff that is more or less stable, that's trading at retail or maybe a little bit below. Models specifically that are 5205s, 5960s, traditional dressy Pateks on a leather strap that hold value well, have more or less been the same price years ago, and I think will probably continue to be the same price moving forward where people will not get hurt. In fact, I have dealers calling in asking for these models. We just did a trade show at the Antique Show in New York, and we had two dealers come up specifically asking for models like that. 5396s, 5205s, 5960s, stuff like that.
So I'd assume that'd kind of be your first pick, and that's a great point. I think most dress watch Patek Philippe's are going to be a great value, especially right now in the current market. And it actually ties into what my first pick is, which is there's actually two models which are kind of in the same vein in that they have the same case as a 5320G, which is a perpetual with the cream dial specifically. I think those are astronomically good value. And even a 5172G, which is a manual wine chronograph. You're going to find both of these now today under $60,000 pending year and condition. These are going to be retail-wise probably well over that. Again, because they're complicated Patek Philippe's, and I think just phenomenal values and probably two of the quintessential complications, right? A perpetual calendar and a manual wine chronograph. So yeah, I think the value right now, no doubt about it, is in your calendar wristwatches, is in your manual wine chronographs, and I think also personally, which is my second pick, is in your world times. I think the world times are so dang underrated. Specifically, I have an affinity for, at least of recently, because maybe of Jay-Z or other things, is dress watches on bracelet, right? Specifically 5131G, 5131R. Even I saw Adam Menta had a 5146. It was like a blue one in white gold on a bracelet, which was super spectacular, cool. Absolutely beautiful. And again, you're going to find these a full white gold Patek Philippe world time, right? You get the 240 micro rotor movement, world time being one of their most iconic complication, under $50,000. Where else can you find that value? Specifically, I mean, compared to a 5811. Not as complicated. It's also white gold. It's $155,000 today.
So I think it's very hard to point out your top three Patek Philippe's, but let's just start with number one being the complication line of stuff. That's not a crazy premium. It's not a grand complication. Something that's not necessarily an application piece. That's very hard or very big barrier entry to enter. Stuff that's sub $100,000, somewhere probably I would say in between the $30,000 to $100,000 line. That's where you're going to find your 5172s. That's where you're going to find a lot of world times too. Yeah. Right. So I think the criteria we have to look at is those complications within that price range. Also, it's important to point out that we like to tell our clients to buy stuff that is no longer in production. Yeah. I try to tell people nowadays to stay away from new releases. I know everybody likes what's new, what's hot, and they want to be the first one to have it. But as we've seen, especially recently, you can get hurt doing that because basic economics, the more stuff comes on the market, naturally the more price is going to drop. So anything new that is released, I would say wait, unless you're getting it at list from the AD, even then still. I would say wait it out a little bit. We've seen that happen with the 6007Gs, right? And a couple other pieces, 5226s. Just a lot of those pieces really, really lost value. So I would look into the complication line of stuff, sub $100,000 that is now discontinued.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of idea to have. I mean, even looking at discontinued pieces, right? You can still find value in the sports watch range, right? Like you look at a 5066, 5065, those older Aquanauts, which I actually prefer to a 5167. I think the dial has so much more character to it. It's the same movement. Okay, it doesn't have the integrated strap look, but I mean, to me, it's not that big of a deal. And there's such tremendous value in the current market. So it's not just even in the current watch, in the current releases. You can look back and find a lot of value, specifically in Patek Philippe.
So we pretty much narrowed down, I would say, your complication pieces on a strap, sub $100,000 discontinue. So that's Patek for number one. And there's a lot of pieces within that range. Let's go to number two. What would number two be for you?
For number two, if you're going to look at Patek Philippe, you got to talk their grand complication. When we're talking grand complication, we're talking a combination of either perpetual calendar, minute repeater, manual wind chronograph. It's going to be some form or another, all of those complications combined. For me personally, I think, and we've talked about this, probably the most undervalued Patek Philippe maybe of all time is a 5204 1R, right? So it's a split-second perpetual calendar in full rose gold on a bracelet. Listen, the blue dial is going to trade at a big premium, but it's much rarer, obviously. But the black dial, listen, is no slouch. It's one of the nicest watches I think Patek has ever made.
Whether you get it on a strap, whether you get it on a bracelet, the 5204 is by far, I think, in the whole entire Patek Philippe catalog, maybe even in the world, the most undervalued watch, because you're going to you're talking gold Nautilus numbers with far more complication. Now, the problem is, when I speak to a lot of collectors, is the split second. Right, so essentially what you're doing is you're taking perpetual calendar, you have a chronograph, and then a split second. Probably a function you're not going to use, also a function that thickens the case a little bit. But knowing that it's there, knowing the mechanics, knowing the engineering that goes behind it, I think is very important for people to understand. But it's that conversation that you have to have with the person as to why this watch costs so much money. Yet you can still pick it up way under MSRP.
And not to mention, it's got just as much wearability, in my honest opinion, as a rose gold, Nautilus, for example. Let's be honest. If you buy a 5980 in rose gold, 5990 in rose gold, I'm wearing an AP chronograph. How many times have I used a chronograph?
Not much.
One time to make sure it works. That's pretty much the amount of times I've ever used it. So realistically, how many times are you going to use the actual complications? Probably not all that much, and it's just as wearable. It's not, okay, it doesn't have the water resistance. Name me one person who goes swimming in a 5990 in rose gold. I don't know a single person, and certainly I wouldn't ever tell the viewers to try it out, you know what I mean? So that's the thing. There's value not just in just how limited it is, because it's far more limited than any rose gold sports piece that they make, but also there's value in the complication from the most prestigious brand in the world today.
I absolutely agree with that. And I would say for number 3, I'm actually I can't not say because I'm wearing a 5990 on my wrist, but not the 5990 specifically. Older discontinued Nautiluses. Modern discontinued Nautiluses. 5980 in steels, any dial variant. 5726s in steels, any dial variant, and 5711s. Because I think that we got to the point in the market where affordable is not the term, but safe is a better term for them, because we've seen how high they got, and now they came down to a number. I remember, and I don't like harping on this too much, and we spoke about the market crashes and the volatility has happened, but when this started to happen, somebody asked me where I think the watch market was going to land. We're talking about the pieces that are premiums that were trading for crazy numbers.
Sure.
And if the watch market could be shorted, I would have probably lost my bet, because my line of thinking was, okay, as soon as all the money's sucked out of the market, same thing is going to happen with watches, that they're going to go back to these 2018, 2019 levels. However, I was wrong. So yes, they have come down from the peaks, but they've landed at a place where there's still enough demand on the market for them to just kind of stay where they're at. In other words, 5980 in steels for around $100,000, I think that's where they land. I think that's where they are, and I think that's where they are for the long term. 5726, the same thing with 5711s, depending on which caliber and which movement. So in my opinion, if you wanted to pick up a Nautilus or even an Aquanaut, right now is the time, because I don't see this happening too much anymore.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree. In terms of the actual price fluctuation, pretty much for sports Patek, it's been, and you could say this even about like Rolex Daytona's, the highest kind of demanded pieces from Patek and Rolex specifically have stayed stable for the last, I would say, 3 to 6 months. You know, within a certain deviation, like a Panda Daytona hasn't fluctuated that much. Same with like a 5980 in steel, right? It's been around that price range for a very, very long time. Now, you've been in the market for a long time, where you were telling me, actually, just this week, at one point you were negotiating a 5711, right, for $24,000. You wanted somebody to pay $24,000, and then somebody wanted to pay $23,500, right? Now, I think those days naturally are long gone, right? There's much more money in the market than ever before. Collections are bigger than ever before, yada, 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 right? Is there potential that we may go back to a market that is not so much like it was 10 years ago to where people will shift from sports back to dress? Or do you think it's going to be a healthy mix of both, like we started to see now?
That's a very good question. I think that the sports line of watches, whether we're talking Nautilus, whether we're talking Royal Oak, or we're talking Steel Daytonas and stuff like that, I think that's the present, and I do think that's the future. I think there's just too much hype, too much demand around it. And just honestly, it's just so much easier to wear a stainless steel piece every day than it is something on a leather strap, even though you can absolutely wear a leather strap dressy Patek with athleisure wear.
Yep.
Or you can wear it with a tuxedo. Well, actually with tuxedo, you had told me that you're not supposed to wear a watch.
It's supposed to be,
that's actually news, by the way. Apparently you're not supposed to wear with...
a tux is either watchless or time only. It has to be literally hours and minutes. Can't even have a sub-seconds. Yeah.
But anyway, you can absolutely wear a leather strap with athleisure or with a suit. But I would still think it's probably more acceptable for people to wear stainless steel. It's not loud, it's sporty, it's comfortable, and I think that's just a trend that's I think it's gonna be here forever. Now, will you see the trajectory start to move in another direction? Maybe. I don't really know.
Yeah, no crystal balls here.
Balls.
It's so impossible to predict. Now, even in the Nautilus range, right, I think that there's a lot of value in some of what kind of used to be the dogs, right? I forget the reference, but it's Roman numeral dial Nautilus with a power reserve indicator. I think
that's 3710.
Yeah, 3710. That's a tremendous value. Those are kind of cult classics, what I call like a little bit quirky, unique. Do you think those have potential to be something more than they are today, or are they just maybe always going to fall second fiddle to your more typically followed watch 5711, 5712, and so on?
Well, I think that they definitely have potential simply for the fact that their production numbers are so low.
Yep.
Right. So it's hard to say, because in order to make a market with something, really, you have to have enough supply of that product on the market to really control that market, for the grays out there to control the prices, for auction results. But it really remains to be seen. I mean, I think that's a watch that's certainly affordable in comparison to its other Nautilus counterparts. It really depends. It's kind of somewhere stuck in between neo vintage. It's not really a 3700 vintage, and it's also not a 5811 modern. It's kind of stuck somewhere in between. And again, that's a watch that's not liquid today, but for somebody that's looking for it, that means that they really want it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Now, last question for you. I think you had one of the greatest watch takes when you called the Royal Oak the greatest blank canvas in the history of watches, right? And I think in many respects, the Nautilus very much is that. But we've never seen a complicated Nautilus outside of a travel time chronograph and a perpetual calendar.
Correct, perpetual.
Would you like to see kind of an ultra...
No, I wouldn't.
Why
I
not?
wouldn't, because, look, for me, it's kind of one of those things. It depends how you enter the market, I think, is very important. So when I entered the market, over a decade ago, the trend was 5970s. The trend was all these grand complications, I remember. I mean, that's what it was, right? 5070s, 5970s. They were trading for crazy multiples over retail, which, by the way, they still are holding exceptional value.
Yeah.
I think, just kind of a segue off to the side, my favorite reference is the 5970 for what it is. In fact, I actually like the 5970 white gold. I don't know why. I think the white dial pop's gorgeous. So
it's aesthetic perfection.
Yeah, and aesthetic perfection.
It's before, I would say, Patek really became a serially produced manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
It was still very. It's not rare, by kind of older standard. Where some perpetual calendars in 30 years they made 300, but it's still not as common as modern references. Yeah.
So going back to that, my whole take on it was when I saw the whole progression for Nautilus and Aquanaut and how they became what they became today. Essentially, the reason for the Nautilus and Aquanaut, if you just go back in time, was it was supposed to be their sporty answer to a seemingly dressy watch. So why would you ever change that? Case in point, Audemars Piguet started doing that, right? They started making Royal Oak tourbillons. And I actually really like the Royal Oak tourbillons, but guess what? The market doesn't. Yeah. They don't love them. There are perpetuals that trade for higher than tourbillons. And we're not going to sit here and argue what's a higher complication. That's not the point. But tourbillon is always the king, so to speak. They're not that popular, Royal Oak tourbillons. And the worst for me was Audemars Piguet making a minute repeater. Who needs a minute repeater in a seemingly sporty watch? Nautilus and Royal Oak were the answer to sporty watches, and that's where they remain, to me.
I love it. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Let us know down in the comments what you feel are some undervalued Patek Philippe models. Adrian, always a pleasure sitting down with you. And guys, let us know what you want to see from us in the future.